Scott County, providing safe, healthy, and livable communities.
Good morning. We are going to convene the May 20th, 2025 Scott County Board of Commissioners. We are not going to do the Pledge of Allegiance because we did that once already. And we did also participate in a flag exchange ceremony with the SMSC earlier, which was an amazing opportunity. So we've done that. We will now move to item number 5. I love item number 5, recognition of interested citizens. Are there any folks in or out in the hallway that would love to come and talk to the board for any reason? Any reason, anyone? All right, seeing no one, we will move on to item number 6.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for an opportunity for another insightful panel as part of Scott Delivers. Today we'll be focusing on developments within our local criminal justice system, specifically the evolving trends in jail population and crime rates. This session was initially inspired by a thoughtful question from one of the commissioners, prompted by data indicating a decline in the annual average daily population of the Scott County Jail. In response, today's presentation will explore that data in greater detail. We'll highlight how, while the overall jail population has decreased, those who are booked are presenting with increasingly complex mental health needs. In light of these shifts, the county has invested in strategies to connect individuals in the criminal justice system with essential services, aiming to reduce recidivism and promote successful re-entry into the community. We'll also examine some broader crime trends. Before we begin, a brief housekeeping item. We do have an amended page number 5, so if you haven't seen the latest packet, please look at that. And I would now like to invite our facilitators to introduce themselves and their department, and after they go, then we'll also have our fabulous panelists introduce themselves as well.
Good morning, I'm Tracy Cervenka. I'm the Business Operations Manager and Administration.
Brian Beasley, Facilities Manager.
Jeff Smodish, Employee Relations Director.
Carrie Lorenz, Community Corrections.
Amber Barnes, Supervisor of Coordinator Response.
Kayla Punchcard, Detective with the Sheriff's Office.
Jeannie Anderson, Scott County Attorney's Office.
Laura Perkins, Nursing Supervisor.
Caleb Madden, Assistant.
Hot mic.
Caleb Madden, Assistant Director, Scott County Sheriff's Office.
And once again, I'm just going to reiterate, new AV equipment that we're just, this is our first Deliverable Matters with the new, working out the bugs. Danny Lenz, Office of Management. I'm very nervous, yes.
Budget. Lieutenant County Sheriff.
All right, we might make a few adjustments on the fly here, but yes, okay, we're going to take a little sound check break. Once the bugs are worked out, it is going to be amazing.
Must be mosquito control.
Oh, true, that is.
Mosquito control here.
If in doubt, go old school or semi. So we just may have a little pause as we pass the microphone here and there.
Okay. We're wondering if having this on is possible.
Sure, let's try it. Let's work it out, real time.
All right, I'm testing. Nope, that's not. Well, I'm also the first person to ask a question here of you all. Did we already do the summary? Did I miss it?
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry. So on page 9, that slide refers to the annual jail average daily population. And those numbers seem to have dropped, and I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you think is contributing to that trend.
Well, I'll start it off and then I'll head into some of our detectives as well and things like that. Prior to COVID, prior to 2019, 2020, I think in 19 our numbers were in the high 130s, and typically trended a couple people a year. It went up in the average population each day, and now we sit around 100. So it's obviously a very dramatic change, but I think there's multiple pieces, and some we'll get into around reentry and the social worker in the jail, just pieces we do. You've heard updates on treatment court, veterans court, all those things I think combine. I think there's no magic bullet here of what changes it, but a lot of things. And then for the jail operations, I would say mainly it's investment in the courts. So adding those courtrooms and judges that happened, the additions over there. the system just runs better, the pre-sent investigations, all those things are happening quicker, and that means there's a turnaround quicker of people getting to see a judge when they can. As the sheriff, I have no control over the population. I don't decide who gets arrested. I don't decide how long they stay. It's, you know, it's the courts and all the behind the scenes that happens that talks about efficiencies, and has become a more of a well-oiled machine in how people are seen by a judge and moved on to the next thing. And then we are doing things in the back end that hopefully prevent them from coming back as quickly or if at all. So that's the main part. And then there's a piece too, I'm gonna hand it down to Detective Punchcard just to talk about even some crime trends that have changed, where when I was a detective, we were doing, especially in the summertime, multiple burglaries a week, just things like that were happening a lot, and now the crime has changed a little bit too, so we're just not seeing some of the same interactions out in the community as well around crime.
So my piece is to talk about different scams and uptick in different crimes that have been occurring since what Sheriff Hendon said was, you know, traditionally burglaries, is now we have crimes that occur online. So we have different scams that occur through different platforms. Facebook is a big one. We also have an uptick in like Bitcoin, cryptocurrency frauds that are occurring. Within the last year, the legislator in Minnesota passed a law that makes it you can only put in up to $2,000 currency in a cryptocurrency machine that you'll find like at a gas station or whatnot, and that has helped significantly in limiting the amount of money that our citizens are able to put in at one given time. But in addition to that, there is another law that allows us to get the money back from the crypto machine company if they are a new customer. So far I have investigated 3 of those with 100% clearance. So
Wow.
That's been very successful, and we're really glad for that.
Wow.
Sure. Okay, I got 2 mics, all right. So one of the questions I have is, Scott County is unique, as they call it, in entertainment, right, the capital. And with an amphitheater coming soon with a capacity of 20,000, how unique, what does that have to do? I know page 5, you look at felonies versus gross misdemeanors. How do you adjust that focus and change having that different dynamic in other counties? Is there an impact that way?
So like for the amphitheater specifically, you know, it will be a lot of events and a lot of people, but also in the past when they've had large concerts like that, we don't see like droves of people come to jail. You know, it might drive up a couple of deals, but a lot of them at those facilities do a good job of at the low end with security and stuff, like not over serving and getting people out of there before they cause a big problem. So we don't see a big uptick in that, but definitely the venues in our community do drive up. You know, there's tens of thousands of people in our community each day visiting different entertainment venues, so it does drive some of our filings and police activity, you know, that does come through, but not a huge driver on the jail specifically, like I said, on a concert venue. And then also in talking to county sheriffs around the state too, it seems like everybody, if you look at their daily population, does have a large proportion of people that aren't residents that are in custody, and that to me is more of the factor of how crimes are committed. Somebody going around doing, say, credit card frauds at gas stations, right? They're gonna hop in a car and they're gonna make a loop around the whole metro and eventually get caught, but they're gonna have filings in all kinds of counties, not just where they live. So a lot of just crime, or you look at addiction issues and that people are on the move and doing things kind of all over, so they end up landing in jails all around the metro. It is very common, but I think Jeannie can probably speak to even the filings as well.
A little bit to the filings, but generally speaking, what we see with those smaller charges, the misdemeanors and the petties and stuff like that, they stay about the same. They go up and down a little bit, but they change more year to year. So I don't know that we're anticipating a huge increase there, but we would tend to see it going up and down normally anyway.
Kind of a follow-up question on that. Can you tell us, because when we look at page 5, you know, it talks about the case filings by most serious charge level. what else is there to that? That doesn't tell us any specifics about the offenses. Can you talk to us about the complexity of cases that your office is seeing?
Yeah, so we are seeing the cases go down in number for some of those more serious offenses, the felonies. But the severity of the cases that we're seeing are still staying pretty significant. We're seeing like the murders and the really significant assaults and that sort of thing still in those numbers. So even though the overall numbers go down, that general severity level that we see is still staying really high and increasing the work that we have to have involved in it, particularly when we think about like body cameras and the evidence that's coming in. Even though there's fewer cases, we're still seeing a significant amount of work and actually an increase because of how that is coming to us with all of that data and the fact that it is kind of that electronic piece instead of the papers that it used to be, having to wade through all of that stuff to figure out where the important pieces are, and being responsible for having all of that is creating a lot more work even with those cases. And then of course, as far as the jail is concerned, we're seeing some of those other mixes of the population that's coming to us having those Rule 20s that are filed and people having those higher levels of needs for those offenses and those more serious offenses that we're seeing.
And Katie, if I could add to that, since we don't have a local paper anymore, people don't know. Like for instance, right now we've got 4 murder cases going on. Jury selection starts on one of them on Tuesday after Memorial Day. So those murder cases take up a significant amount of law enforcement time to investigate and a significant time of my attorneys to prosecute, because it's typically going to take 2 attorneys to prosecute those murder cases. A complex crim sex case, which those numbers never seem to go down. So like Jeannie said, the complexity and the time involved in going into these major cases is really quite significant.
This is on now? All right. Well, I apologize because I think you all may have just sort of answered my question that I had prepared, but I want to validate this. So if I look at page 5, right, the number of gross misdemeanors has kind of flip-flopped above the number of felonies. But when I look at page 11, the inmate bed days by offense level, that number of felony days sort of staying static. Is that indicative that the complexity of the cases, while the volume is dropping, the complexity is maintaining high, or is there something else at work when I look at those numbers? Because there's a bit of a tension between those two things.
Well, I can speak to the bed days and the severity level, because we have like those felonies and those gross misdemeanors where the Rule 20s are getting filed, for example. That extends a case because you have additional hearings and different assessments that have to be done and that sort of thing. So that's going to increase those bed days on those cases alone.
No, I think Jeannie really covered it. That is definitely what happens. And then also some of the other behind-the-scenes stuff of the courts. You know, the law changes, things, gross misdemeanors, they're getting people through the process a lot quicker. And the people in jail are the people we should have in jail, you know, with the serious felony cases. But it's totally true. One person sitting on a murder case might sit for a year and a half waiting for trial. That can, you know, skew the results of a bunch of people coming on the weekend for DWI or domestic very quickly when you look at the total bed days.
Can I ask a quick follow-up? Is that, all right. And what metrics, if any, are we tracking or buried in here that I may have missed that sort of speak to that increased acuity? Because I've heard several of you, and I know that's a conversation we actually had, Caleb, some years ago about, you know, how we try to monitor the acuity of our friends in the jail to sort of try to, again, you know, assess how much more work it is, even though the volumes are differentiating. I think that would be, is there anything in the works?
Yes, absolutely. You know, I think that the main basis of that question has been answered. There's a lot more administrative things that kind of go along with this. I think the efficiency that's been realized with different parts of the county and the courts working together has really brought some of that time down. So Rule 20s, and I'm not sure if it's in the packet, I'd have to look here, evaluations of inmates are much better. They're happening much more frequently. So I guess the data is not in this packet, but that would speak to that task as being something that just works much better now.
Just a little bit. On page 12, that data talks about inmate healthcare visits, and it seems that the doctor and ER visits have really increased, and I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about the trends that you're seeing in healthcare needs in the jail.
I'll start this off and then hand it off to Laura. So we do see certainly an increase of people going to the emergency room. I think it's twofold. The reason that the data is showing that, one is the complexity, just like Jeannie said about cases, the percentage of the cases that we have in jail that are complex cases has increased. Same with medical needs. We see people with much more complex medical needs, oftentimes coupled with mental health issues that require a doctor to see them immediately. And then I think the other thing I'd really consider is the way we've looked at reporting to the Department of Corrections more accurately when people are going to the emergency room. And I think that's just showing some of those things more that maybe it was happening before, but wasn't showing up in the data, and it is much more accurate now.
I think too that over the since COVID, we've started seeing inmates sooner. So before it was, we followed the DOC standard of every inmate needs to be seen within the first 14 days. We've now increased that to seeing everybody within the first 72 hours. So they're having a nurse contact visit possibly before they're even going to bail hearings, which sometimes when they come in, they don't necessarily give all the true information about their medical needs. They are waiting until they see somebody in a medical uniform and they're being honest and giving those medical needs. That too, we are sending more people to the ER because we're seeing them more often and sooner when they're coming into custody, and a lot of our population have complicated medical needs to where they need to see the medical doctor. With the doctor being there twice a week, we're just putting more eyes on them and having that face-to-face contact versus just reviewing charts.
So I'm going to look at page 15 in correlation with 8. Delivering reentry assistance program. I see that started in 24 and 25, and then multiple bookings have gone down when you look at, say, 3 and 2. Is that really helping with recidivism, lowering the people coming back as we're offering those types of assistance?
I mean, I don't know that we know that for sure, certainly, but just within this graph, it just indicates, there's multiple things that can happen with people in custody. And so there could be, one person could have 6 services that they're requesting. And so, we'd like to think that, yes, by us facilitating that and helping clients with that before they leave the jail, that ultimately the goal is for them not to come back. But I don't know that we have anything that we can say for sure I think it's definitely a factor.
As kind of in regards to the reentry services, in the narrative, it talks about a delineation between the jail social worker and then the jail probation officer. Can Carrie and Amber talk to that and tell us about the efficiencies that has created?
Yeah, I would say we worked really hard, both Carrie, myself, and our managers, to really try to delineate and focus on, while the roles are different, so they sometimes do have an overlap of things that they do, but they also have really unique specialties, and so we really wanted to work on highlighting those. So I would say over the last, maybe year, maybe 6 months specifically, we've really tried to internally delineate what is the social worker's role, what is the reentry worker's role, and really the goal is we don't want inmates to have to know who does what or correction staff to have to know who does what. We really wanted to make it an internal delineation. So some examples of a social worker role. our current jail social worker, Peyton, is fully licensed as a mental health professional. So we really wanted to highlight some of those skills and experiences. So right now, she sees anyone that might have a mental health diagnosis, anyone who sees Wendy or Dr. Kennedy for psychiatry. A lot of inmates that come in are on a civil commitment or are going through the Rule 20 process, so Peyton helps coordinate with that. If there's any like medication refusals, I think we're trying to start with maybe Peyton having to do some education to inmates of the importance of medication, psychiatric medication. She reviews inmates from like Laura's list, anyone that's maybe seen by the mental health center for a crisis assessment. Peyton can do a lot of follow-up visits on that. And I'll maybe let Carrie speak to the reentry role.
Yeah, so Alexis is the probation officer that's actually housed at the jail. That started in January of '24. And I think the majority of her time is spent doing just coordination, especially with treatment stuff. So she's doing, coordination for comprehensive assessments and trying to get clients out into treatment. And so a lot of times you'll have the courts that'll order that a client can be released upon a treatment bed. And so then she's just doing all that coordination with the client, with the treatment providers. And it's not just Scott County clients, she's also coordinating with out-of-county clients. So she's coordinating with Anoka County, Hennepin County, Dakota County. And the nice part about that then too is some of these clients will have holds in other counties or warrants in other counties. So she's able to coordinate and hopefully facilitate those being either quashed or different court dates so that clients are able to get the services that they need and they're not getting released and then picked up on another warrant. So just more effective and efficient.
Try your mic. I think the mics work.
No squeals yet. All right, so I'm going to refer to, and I know maybe you guys can tell us the trend on this, in inmate healthcare visits with 12. Is there a trend with age that we're seeing from a younger to an older, and how do we adjust that with healthcare in Scott County?
So I would say at this point, right now, we're not tracking the age of our population. And that's just, we most definitely can. It's just something that we have not tracked over the years. I will say that it seems that even if they are younger, they've been coming into custody, no matter if it's with us or other counties, more frequent, and they just have more underlying comorbidities due to their drug use, mental health, the non-compliance with taking care of whatever chronic conditions that they have.
I can say anecdotally, well, we don't have data to support it. We do have a population that's somewhat older than when I started working here 18 years ago. That's changed. Why, I don't know, but we certainly see that as a difference. Yeah.
A little bit cart before the horse from me. Apologies, but Brian keeps stealing my questions. Just directing your attention to page 12, if you could just, and I think I'm probably directing this to you, Laura, if I may. Just talk to me about this slide. Again, I see the blue column comes in new. There's, some numbers stay flat, other numbers drop. Can you talk to me about how that all interrelates and what changes may have occurred, just sort of high level? Again, apologies for kind of going back to the open end of the funnel.
I'll start us off here real quick. I think part of this really supports the premise that we have more health care professionals working in the jail. So we're able to have better responses, more efficient responses to deal with this. So I think that is a big part of that. We haven't found the saturation point where the need is being met yet. We don't know if we've hit that yet. We do know we have people with very complex medical issues that are in the jail, and we just don't know at what point we're seeing people more frequently. We're providing that medical professional as soon as possible, and we're seeing that need being utilized. We haven't seen a point where it's kind of flattened out after that.
When I look at slide 12, the column 2024, the nurse visits, health assessments, that's the first year we're tracking those. I don't know if that's something new we rolled out. But then I look down below the nurse visit sick call, that drops to 386 from 661 in 2022. My mind thinks there's a correlation, but in 2023, we didn't have the health assessment and those nurse visits dropped. Again, just anything that changed in our policies, process, or regulations that correlates to that change so that I can understand.
So I would say COVID changed. So 2020, 2021, we were doing COVID rounds every single day, which we would go and ask all the COVID questions. At that point, it gave them a chance to say, you know, I have hypertension or I have diabetes. We weren't tracking that as a sick call or a health assessment at that time. So yes, we were making contact with them in 2021 as 633 times we had inmate contact. Then 2022, we were still doing the COVID rounds. 2023, they started to lighten, so we were seeing less people. Looking at the data from 2020 to 2023, we knew that having that inmate contact was them having us address their chronic conditions. In 2024, we put in the standard that we wanted to meet with everybody within 72 hours for a health assessment. Those nurse visits and sick call never went away. Those were just inmate requests, that they requested to see a nurse for whatever reason that may be. I think that's why there was the change, and we were tracking different things and starting to put new processes in place.
Thank you very much. That's helpful.
If we look at page 6, criminal drug case filings, we notice a general downward trend. But what I've heard you all say to some degree, and is reflected in some of the jail reentry services requested in regards to chemical health help, can you talk to me more about this data from a multi-system approach? So we have drug case filings going down, but we're still hearing that there's a need for that.
I didn't catch all the question. I was looking at the microphones over here, so sorry, I'm a little distracted. But definitely the case filings, there's a couple pieces. So you're talking about the criminal drug case filings, it looks like. Yeah, so there's some changes in state law that happened during that period of time of you think of some of the minor, a trace amount, you know, prior had been a felony, became a gross misdemeanor, kind of becomes not an issue. So some of it was around that. There's the marijuana, cannabis type laws change as well. So some of that did drop down. And then also during, you know, COVID and stuff, you think of there was less contacts in the community on purpose, so less traffic stops, so you're going to find less stuff. And then you look at some of the shortages at some of the police departments in our agency at times where if you're running minimums, like traffic enforcement is the thing you do after you're caught up on everything else. So if there's calls going on, traffic enforcement isn't getting done, you know, versus if you're fully staffed and there's somebody free, they're out doing that. So some of that is just all a combination of some of that activity levels were down quite a bit with some of those changes. But like I said, mainly a lot of statute type changes too, that a lot of those lower level things aren't becoming somebody that gets charged or brought to jail on that.
Can I just say something to bounce off that? I think that even though we're not seeing the drug charges, it doesn't mean that we're not asking the questions once they're in custody if there are chemical dependency issues. So even though we may only have 10 people that have drug charges, we potentially have 25 people that have other charges that do have that chemical dependency, so we're referring them out for chemical health services.
And I think from our office, we never want to say that, oh, it's down and it's never going to come back because we're the pessimists that we are. But it's a situation, I think, where we don't have any good answers for why it is the way that it is. We all kind of have some anecdotal theories, but we haven't seen anything that's actually said that this is why it's down or that it's going to stay down that way.
Looking at slide, or page 8, oh, I'm sorry, looking at page 8, the multiple, the number of jail inmates with multiple bookings. I'm just wondering if you, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. If I move it a little bit away from me. Wondering how that data helps inform your work, the work that you do. And
So I think for, you know, what we see in the jail, this data reflects a lot of different things. So it could reflect somebody who's in on one charge, they were sentenced, and then they're serving weekend sentences. And it'd be, you know, they might be booked multiple times. So it's not, doesn't all speak to recidivism. It might be what they're being requested to do by the courts. The other thing is we do some trading of housing with other counties, which really helps us balance some of our concerns and other counties to do that as well. That's worked really well, but what happens is a person is released from the system, they're booked in that other jail, and then they return to us. Well, they've been in custody one time, it'll show 2 bookings. There's several different things like that or similar to that would show that same data. I wish it was maybe a little better for to speak about recidivism, but I really think it shows a lot of administrative function.
And one idea we had going forward, and this is all manual count as well, you know, we pull all the bookings and sort them down by people, but I think digging into the individuals on those higher levels and actually seeing what it was, we could probably parse out what's recidivism, what is, yeah, somebody got arrested on DWI here, and then 6 months later is a Hennepin inmate, and we're boarding them, and now that shows us 2, you know, just to look into the story of each one of those, I think might give us some real more accurate of what that looks like, because there's obviously an issue if somebody's getting booked 6 times a year, right? But we want to make sure it's the right issue, but, so I think we could dig into that data in the future a little better.
So I'm gonna ask this question like a broad brush, you guys, however you wanna answer it. The first one is obviously offenses per 100,000, right? That really, to me, is the gauge of how safe your community is. What is Scott County's greatest influencer of crime as far as trends right now? I'll give you a fun one.
And this one's a tricky one too, because it's county-wide data. So, you know, our police departments all have an impact on it, and, but those trends nationwide and statewide as well have been slowly going down, those serious crimes as well. But yeah, there's not a ton we control, because we're out in the townships doing those investigations in Credit River, our cities, but you know, it's reflective of the good policing that's done in the community as well, you know, by the staffing levels at our cities and the enforcement or the cooperation we do to get to the bottom of things and solve them. But definitely those trends do continue to go down, but they're hard for the public to see. As Ron mentioned, you know, we don't have newspapers, we don't have a lot of that stuff, but you have social media. So some other things, like I use the example of burglaries, we don't see a lot of, but when somebody's car gets rummaged through, they may go on social media and say, I got robbed last night, right? Well, robbery is a very serious offense, right, of being taking something from a person. You know, so some of it, there's a feeling that crime is the same, but the data, because our population grows, that per 100,000 number continues to just go down. But it's hard for a public perception piece to see sometimes that crime is, you know, because we still have 4 murders going on. We still have, you know, things that happen, but also 25 years ago when our population was in half, right, you know, the amount of murders have a difference in that. So the population does drive that there's going to be crime, there's going to be activity, but overall it definitely does go down. But, you know, I think, I mean, some of the stuff probably on more the back end, the reentry, the different things that are going on, the way we monitor people on probation, right, all is having huge impacts on that. And then going into the early learning, reading, all those things we do have things that we can't measure, but years later, they probably do have huge impacts, right, on getting to the core, or even the mental health work in the schools. All these things that we do as a county, I think, probably impacted more than we know, but it's also impossible to see what that number is, you know, but the trends lay it out, I think, that there's some work being done that makes a difference.
So to shift, because I was looking at page 9.
Jeff, I just want to interrupt you. Can you please refrain from using the word shift? It gives us, you know, PTSD when we hear the word shift. Sorry.
I will.
But you're not the state, you're not talking, okay, sorry. Sorry, yes. Shift is allowed, sorry.
Looking at the average daily population of the jail on page 9, I want to ask a question that, again, it kind of, we're drifting back, it's more basic and maybe everybody in the room knows, but Is more inmates in the jail, we think for certain reasons would be worse, or more inmates in the jail better? Is it a linear progression, or are there stage gates or points in the population growth of the jail where it's more or less efficient? Why does this matter talks about, this all determines the care of costs for inmates, et cetera, so I'm thinking about that. I used to work, as some of you all know, and just to give some background, because I'm realizing it's a bit of an inscrutable question where I was going. I've worked in healthcare for a number of years, and right in certain areas, in like an emergency department, you have what's called a circle unit, or there are pods. There seem to be some similarities with the jail. And right, if we have 4 pods at United Hospital in St. Paul, we want to be operating on like the maximum number for 3 pods, because if we get one more patient, we have to open up the 4th pod. Suddenly we have to bring on all these other nurses, not using the S word, and that's an expense to us. So there's a magic point, like we want to be at 13 patients on 4,300. Is there anything like that at play here in the jail? I think there might be, but I don't really know.
Yes, I think in asking the question, you already answered it.
Yeah.
That's exactly how it works. We have pods in the jail, and there's different classifications. We're required to keep people, separate based on gender, their risk level to be assaultive towards somebody, or maybe they need protection. So we have these different areas in the jail, and once they hit a certain number, well, then we'd have to open another area for that.
And to what extent, if any, have we thought about that impact, or does that inform when we board, or how we structure to avoid having the maximum number of pods open, or to have only pods open that are sort of fully filled, to use a really redundant term?
Yes, I think that's a daily conversation that we have at the jail about how to best utilize the space we have. Oftentimes we can't combine things, but we move people around to accommodate for those numbers, and it certainly affects our decisions in boarding for other counties. That's something we're interested in doing. However, if it affects our staffing, we have to take that into account, that there's a cost involved with that.
And the last follow-up, I don't mean to becoming very unpopular, mostly with Caleb. Do you know, or Mr. Sheriff, are we aware of any changes at the regulatory or state level that might impact our ability to manage that population and might impact the cost of running the jail, or take up some of our flexibility away? Anything that would impact this in our calculations?
Yes, absolutely. So right now, 2911 is the rules that govern jails in the state of Minnesota. Those are being rewritten. They're going through a rework right now. I think a timeline to have them out is January of 2026. What we're seeing out of that is significant constraints, and places that we're going to have to change the way we operate, basically, and that is going to have an impact on how we staff and how people are housed, which would lead to increased cost.
And to just follow up on Jeff's question too, is the difference between a hospital as well is because of our classifications, we can't constrict as easily. We can't say, let's just close this housing unit for 2 months because we're down low in here, and combine classifications, because the DOC rules do govern how we staff them, how we classify people, and then the ratios of inmates to, so it's a little challenging, but the building is nimble. We do some stuff time to time to move people around to try to keep that down, but it would be super nice if we could just close a housing unit for 2 months. And then because of our licensure too, we have to get approval from the DOC every time we do anything dramatic like that, because they need to look at it. Well, you're gonna combine maximum, minimum inmates, why? It would be one thing if we were down staff and they're like, okay, for a month or something is okay, but for us to be like open-ended, we're gonna move them. So there is a process that goes into play too of how we're approved for our staffing plan and licensure and stuff that, but like I said, our building being newer, we have a little more flexibility. Some of the other metro jails that are a little bit older, even the way they're constructed, is making it very difficult to meet some of the DOC regulations too. Is just how many people, how you have eyes on a cell block and that. So we do well there, but it's tight. It's hard to. So the boarding usually works out good for us when it's a need, because we already have to staff that area, and adding 15 more people or something wouldn't change any of those outcomes. And then, like I said, the total cost of the operation is dependent on that, because you're spreading out costs over, you think of the kitchen vending contract or laundry or stuff like that. You still have to do those things, so having a few more people doesn't really change those costs. It just, spreads them out over the population a little bit.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Any question up here?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question in this category. It's been sort of covered already, but I want to ask it and clarify it maybe in a different way. If you said you had 100 and you're staffed appropriately for 100, but you could really, with that staff, take 130, or I would like to see us track a boarding goal, in terms of the staffing you have. If like I said, if we have 100, showing that we have about 100. But if you could really take 130, then we ought to have a staffing goal and be approaching other counties and say, hey, we have space, we can take X. I would like to track how we're doing on that.
Yeah, and we could take, Caleb, we could handle 150, 160 a day probably with our current staffing. It gets, once you get in the higher numbers, it gets tight if the right amount of people come in from a certain offense, then you have a little shuffling to do, but the challenge is more supply and demand. So since we've built our building, all the metro jails or most of the ones in the outskirts have been replaced since then, so the demand isn't there. So like right now, we had Hennepin for 6-8 months last year. It sounds like they may still have some need later in this year, but we ask, we do search, but there's not a demand. There's not a need right now for county jail space is kind of the issue. So we'd definitely be taking them if there was the need, but it's a little bit of a struggle to find the need right now because of just all the jails were updated.
I also kind of wonder on the category of that word we're not supposed to use, shift, but when they close the Stillwater prison, are you kind of wondering, what is the state going to do? Are they going to try and send populations back to jails?
And it does reflect back to, was it 2008 when they did some of that stuff where they changed some of the sentences? I believe I wasn't in this position then, but yeah, they did. The state did end up cost shifting some things, but saying, if it's this type of sentence, you're just going to go to the county jail. So that could be. We haven't heard that as a part of the plan, but I know that has happened in the past where they do some slight shifts to keep their numbers in check and don't really pay us for that. They just kind of change the rules.
Yeah. I have one more question, if I could. On the idea of recidivism and reducing that, I've always wondered, I don't know the current status of the amount of programming in our jail, but this is like a broken record. I've mentioned it many times over the years. When I was more aware of our programming in other county programs like Dakota, I'd say, boy, their programming is much more robust than ours. And I don't want to do programming for programming's sake, but if that has a way of helping reduce recidivism, I'm trying to say that, but that's a good thing, And so I'm kind of wondering, should we be tracking programs and attendees in programs some way monitoring how we're doing on that?
Yeah, and a lot of our programming history was staffing level issues. So our staffing levels were low, we'd have turnover, and the programming person would get pulled to cover shifts. So we really had issues there. Now that we've been stable for the last 2 years, I think now our program people are getting more mature in the processes and building up some of it. And Caleb, you can talk. I don't know if we actually measure the specific attendance, but you can speak to that.
We do actually measure the specific attendance, and I would completely agree with you that maybe 5 years ago, Dakota had a much more robust programming schedule. I think we're catching up significantly on that with adding programs, especially programs that are specific to problems that inmates face. That's always, we're trying to get programs that will be helpful to people, especially as it relates to recidivism issues. So parenting classes, that's something we're actually bringing in. We've sent our programmers to a new class to teach it's a class regarding coping skills, just how to cope with life, how to cope with emotions. And we see a lot of engagement with that, which is really great. I would completely agree with the sheriff. This was, for a while, our staffing was so tight that we're barely making a buy to get programs to inmates, and now we have the ability to do that. And it's really, really neat to watch our people, that they're interested in that. And
very good.
It's neat to get them involved.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm just going to stay, thank you, Mr. Chair, on this same topic because I'm going to ask the opposite of Commissioner Ulrich because it's like as we've seen the population decrease and we know that a lot of our counterparts have excess capacity, and we also know from our own experience that our per diem might cover marginal costs, but not per person costs. Have we looked or are we starting to look at the thought of, decreasing our population or not increasing our staffing and then utilizing if we go over, because I know that's a fear, you know, all of a sudden we have 10 more people or 5 more people. Is there the capacity out there for us to board to really, you know, I mean, it seems like we have a trend here where we should start looking at that.
Yep, and we have been looking at those numbers and what the break-in, we were talking with Danny about a couple months ago, had a meeting just to kind of discuss some of it. Some of it is the break-even though as well, because if we board, say, 20 people out, and then you look at what that costs for a month, all of a sudden, oh, we didn't really, you know, so there's a break-even, and then back to the classifications, you'd have to do it based on, all right, we're gonna send all the females or all the maximum, you'd have to pick that group so you could actually close the housing unit. And one thing we talked about is, you talk about some of the challenges of the inmates that have the serious medical or mental. Yeah, their county's not gonna want them, right? Because they're not gonna wanna inherit that risk and workload. So then you get in the problem of, if you wanna eliminate a whole group of classification, you know, and get 20 people out the door, it's still challenging because there are gonna be the one-offs or more than one-offs probably of those. So it gets to be a little bit of a mess. They're trying to figure that out, but there is definitely some logic behind. I know the state did a study last year on regionalization, trying to look at, and I went to the meeting and I was like, I think I'm the only one color on the map of a county that responded that they liked the idea. It's like, what? You know, like there was just no buy-in, and some of these jails have 3 to 6 people in a day, and they're not interested in regionalization. You're like, that's where it would make sense, you know, so I think hopefully over time that thought gets, because that would make sense of some of these issues of, you know, combining some of these smaller counties or a close neighbor and sharing or dividing up, like I said, some of the workload. Now, the other issue is when you do house out, people are generally coming back to court pretty often too, so there's this churn that would happen as well of getting people back and forth, you know, but, because a lot of people aren't here for a long, long time, but yeah, it's complex, but there is something there of trying to figure out, but it's finding the right way to do it that you could actually save money and not, save us maybe a small amount, but then look at all the extra work you're doing and figure out you're kind of chasing your tail a little bit, but it's a little wiggly. I said it'd be way better to have more of a regional or statewide approach to some of this, I think, of kind of solving some of these problems.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. I have a question directed for Detective Punchikar. At the beginning of the meeting, you talked about some of the changing trends and what you're seeing, and you spoke about some of the online trends. I was wondering, how does this impact training for officers, and what does that look like?
Yeah, it really does. It's kind of a whole new idea of investigating. Some of us are more tech savvy than others, and some of us, quite frankly, just enjoy investigating that more than others. We have been going to a lot of trainings. We have some locally. I think last week there was one in, just locally in Shakopee that we went to. We are kind of going all over the place trying to just get a grip of how to investigate these. We also network with different agencies. We work with each other. The investigators in Scott County have a group that we work amongst each other with. We work with different BCA and federal agents as well, because someone may have worked it before and there's no sense reinventing the wheel. So we're all learning.
That harkens back to another thing mentioned in the narrative, talking about how there's some challenges with a lot of these new crimes being more cross-jurisdiction. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, it is a big challenge. This morning I was talking to my partner about one that he has ending up somewhere in Florida. And he's like, now what? I'm like, well, we're not going there, unfortunately, right? Although we might wish maybe we hold that for January. So we do work with lots of different jurisdictions weekly. And it may be that we call down there and see, you know, who lives at this address. Sometimes that jurisdiction will follow up for us. Sometimes they end up overseas. And, you know, that's kind of where this new law with the Bitcoin in particular that lets us get the money back from the kiosk company comes in handy. No, we're not getting the money specifically back from the suspect, but then that kiosk company, the hope is they will have higher standards for everybody as to who they allow to use and who will become a victim and their clientele as far as the suspects end.
And I just want to fill in a little on these Bitcoin, just to give the reference to, these are the ones where you get the fake call of, this is, you know, Lieutenant Lane at the Scott County Sheriff's Office, you missed a jury, you know, notice, you're gonna get arrested, and they get you on the phone, they do this high pressure sales, and people will drive to a Cub Foods and fork over money into these Bitcoin machines, as all part of the scam. And I mean, we had some went 3 locations at least, maybe more, where they'll convince them, okay, now you put $3,000 in that one, go to the next, go to Burnsville, put it in there, and they'll literally $9,000-$10,000 some of these folks will. So, yeah, so part of that law is we're not actually catching the bad guy, but the vendors who are allowing this transactions to happen are getting punished. They're having to reimburse the money if it's a brand new customer who's never used Bitcoin machine and shows up and just does 3 transactions. You know, maybe you should have better constraints on your business. But so it's been helpful, but it is complicated. And then a lot of these too, people will call us and be like, well, here's the phone number of who the scammer is, and here's the email address. Well, they're all fake, you know, is the other thing. So they are, some are even across country lines, you know, that are using technology to mask, you know, who they are and where they're from. So they hit really quick dead ends, or they're using VPNs and things too, that it's the technology piece. If you can do subpoenas and search warrants to try to ID them, and months later, you just hit a dead end sometimes because of the way they figure out how to mask, you know, their identities. So, thank you.
Any final burning questions from our facilitators?
I do. One burning one I have is one that was actually really important to me in my former career. I worked with, as a city director with the Department of Corrections in New York, Shock Monterey, and we collaborated between a city and state level where I brought inmates down and worked with them, gave them opportunities to learn even with felonies, trades as far as painting, concrete, you name it. It was a successful program that we did for 6 years. It lowered recidivism down to 7%, lowest in the state. But I found, and why I took it to heart is I actually went out and worked with them every Friday. And I found that each one was unique. Whether you were dealing with a veteran or somebody that made a mistake with a petty crime. So, you know, for me, when we look at jail reentry, and it's amazing what you're doing, I can tell you there's a difference from the people I worked with from a veteran that sometimes don't want to open up. They don't want help. Can you explain some of these unique situations you're running into and how you're helping them get back on their feet? Because when they come back in the community, we want them to be successful. And what I found out, and when I spoke with them, even from the director of corrections, Leroy Fields, is a lot of them, when we help them learn these trades, and contractors, where they have felonies or not, are able to go out and contribute to a community and get a job, they now have opportunities. When we don't give them those opportunities, they just go back to what they know is committing a crime. So I'd like to hear a little more on that.
Yeah, I would say we are seeing much more acute mental health in the jail. Laura can probably speak to the medical issues we're seeing in the jail that historically we just have never really had to deal with. So I think we've had to get really creative on some cases. That's so funny that you're talking about that, because I just was speaking with a Dakota County jail social worker, and in Dakota County they do, they incorporate like art therapy for some of their inmates, and then they just had a big art show where the inmates got to display their art, maybe at like a library or something, and sell it. And so, you know, being able to connect with other counties of like, what are you guys doing to help with kind of these creative situations to address recidivism is always something that I'm trying to do by networking. But yeah, we lean a lot on our mental health center. They do an incredible job for some additional programming, but yeah, we're seeing just a lot of new things in the jail that we haven't seen historically. We're having to lean on other departments within the county. I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, I mean, Alexis does a lot of the same things too. There's a group within the state that she belongs to that they just do a lot of resource sharing. And obviously we have clients that are coming here from other counties, so they can't necessarily utilize our services. So she's just not working with, whether it's the Department of Corrections or the different county folks that are doing the similar work, so that they can kind of just build those resources and build those connections so they can make those phone calls when, hey, I've got, you know, so-and-so here from Dakota County, what can I give them, you know, as far as resources go?
Yeah. And 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, we started the resource fair at Scott County.
Yeah.
So for those who aren't familiar, every like fall-ish, I think we host a resource fair for inmates. We have outside community providers, maybe like a substance abuse agency, like a parenting class agency, whoever it might be, physically come into the jail, and then we let, kind of like a job fair, right? We let inmates go around to each one of their booths, learn about their resources. they can apply for health insurance during that time. They can apply for like SNAP benefits through the county. And so that has been a really big success, and that's something that we're going to continue to do at Scott County. So
Our, you know, I think we had about 24 vendors for that resource fair.
Yeah.
Which is, we went and observed one in another county, and I think they had 11 vendors, and we were really impressed by it. So we reached out, and our programs team, our social worker, community corrections, were all able to generate 24 vendors that came in and met with all of our inmates. It was great. I think, you know, as far as programming, one thing that's really important, and with Peyton and Alexis, you know, working on our teams, our programmers at the jail are able to really focus just on working with inmates and inmate programs. And that's been a big change, and will continue to be, you know, we're able to really grow that some of that recidivism, or possibly recidivism reducing activities that we can do.
Thank you all. I'd like to take the opportunity to turn it back to Mr. Chair and the commissioners for any additional questions at this time.
Thank you so much. Members, any further questions from, yeah?
First, a comment so we don't lose it. I just have to say thank you and congratulations to these departments, because if we think back to a little more than 8 years ago when we first started, our numbers looked different, crime was higher, there wasn't good coordination with our reentry. So much has changed. I think we should be really proud of the progress we've made, you know, and I think sometimes some of you out there might look to, just me, I can't speak for everybody, like, we're working hard, why are you trying to make us save more money and more money? But, you know, that's the result, is that if we do a better job, it's better for everybody and better for the taxpayer. So first, congratulations and thank you, sincerely and seriously. And then just one thing that I don't think we touched on, and I know it's only a person here or there, but they're a big user of resources. Tell us just a little bit about when we have to hold somebody who's mentally ill and dangerous, awaiting placement, what we've learned or what we're doing differently. I don't think we have to go backwards, but, you know, just where we're at now and what we've learned to make that be the least harmful situation for everybody involved.
I think we have seen a decrease in that. Last time we were measuring it, we were looking at about 6 months from the time someone was ordered to be placed in a state facility and when they actually arrived there. We're closer to 90 days right now. So that time difference has made a difference. All this stuff we've been talking about with jail programming, with having a social worker, having our work with the mental health center, in collaboration with them to provide support while they're there, has been helpful. It is still very difficult to house someone who has significant, you know, emotional or other concerns that are, you know, they're really struggling with and they need treatment for. So that we're just not designed to take care of. It's tough, but we're doing our best to respond to it, and we are seeing that time has gone down, that we're hanging on to them, so it's been beneficial.
I would just add to that, Commissioner, thinking of our Scott County as a handful to maybe 3 that are deemed mentally ill and dangerous, right? And that's like the most intense level of a commitment that you can get because it's indeterminate. The most recent one that transitioned from our Scott County Jail to St. Peter, because the jail did such a great job of trying to engage him, and Dr. Kennedy was working with him and he was med compliant. Once he got to St. Peter, he was able to transition through their programs quicker because he was pretty stable, right? Probably compared to other mentally ill MIND individuals. So I think our jail does a really incredible job from all aspects of really trying to engage those people that are unfortunately just sitting there waiting.
Thank you for that. That's really good to hear, and really, really good for all of you to know, because I recently toured down in St. Peter and saw those different levels and understand the resources and just everything that goes into it. So the fact that if we have a citizen, a friend or neighbor, you know, these are our people who need to go there, the fact that they maybe aren't going to be there quite as long or all of their lives and can get through that is really, really a great thing for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm gonna, can you go to, I'm looking at it on my phone, so I think it's page 2 or 3 on the full size. Yeah, there we go, under the factors impacting. I mean, we've kind of talked about this. We've had different questions kind of coming and going through this, the whole idea of that the jail numbers are just down. Where does it say, yeah, point number 1, jail population's decreased. Some of this is likely due to the changes for county attorney and county sheriff with, you know, different decisions they made, but not likely enough to reflect the changes. So the question is, because it feels like this is a lot like some of the conversations we have with our FRC. You know, our out-of-home placement numbers are down, all these things are down, and, you know, is it prevention? And so the question I always ask when that comes up is, do we know, or how do we find out, because it was talked about, some of the diversion things we're talking about doing at FRC maybe are impacting here. What do other counties look like? Here's the question. What do other counties, other peers, other jurisdictions look like? Are they experiencing the same thing, or is it something unique? I would just love to find a way to, I know you can't always measure everything. I get that. There's the quantitative and the qualitative, but is there a way that we could somehow get our arms around it so that we know that, yes, these things are working? I do believe also, to say that, Suzanne's not in the room, but when I'm asking the FRC folks that same question, it's like, I do believe that these things are working. I just feel like it would be a stronger position for all of us to be in, like, and potentially even double down in some of those things that, because they are working. But right now, we kind of think they might be working. They probably are. Is there, so that's the question. How do we measure up to our peers? How do we measure just ongoing as we're going on this journey to really know that, yeah, this is working and we're spending $1 or 10 or millions, but golly, we are saving more than we're spending. And so, A, we're getting transformation in people's lives. People are maybe seeing hope for the first time. And oh, by the way, we might actually be doing it with less taxpayer money.
I think, and I'll have Caleb fill in, he made more details about jail population. I believe most metro counties, the number has been gone down at some degree in the last, last few years, minus, maybe Hennepin and Ramsey, different, with different trends that have happened where their numbers might be opposite of that. But I would think the other issue is, so it's hard to measure or hard to figure out why something didn't happen. But a lot of these counties already were doing some of the same program we do, so we're kind of doing best practices on treatment court, veterans court, right? But I assume most of the other counties, the bigger metro counties, were already doing that stuff as well. So I think we're in the same box as them on getting some of those services out there, But yeah, it's very hard to predict why something doesn't happen. But I think the data tells that. But I don't know, Caleb, is there any difference on the jails metro-wide of what they're seeing?
Yeah, they're seeing very similar trends. So we meet monthly with the other jail administrators in the metro and just out on the outskirts of the metro as well. It's been really helpful to be kind of competitive in that group where we're trying to find solutions, and that's great. Yeah, we're seeing very similar trends. I think the data is showing what we want. We have trouble showing correlation. Does the data equal that is because of that work or not? And that is hard to get at.
Well, in that same vein, it's like, okay, are other counties doing greater or lesser degrees of prevention than what we're doing? Is there, because that's what I'm looking for too, is like, what if we're spending money and time and talent and treasure, is there a payoff? So that's kind of the, I don't know if there's anyone wants to take a crack at that one. The other question is completely different, scammers, holy cow. I didn't realize I had a bunch of rich uncles, all in Nigeria. I'm trying to get in touch with them. They're definitely getting in touch with me, but I haven't found a crypto machine yet to get that inheritance. But when I do, I'll let you know. But in the meantime, local authorities, what are you gonna do? I mean, this is like an FBI, ATF type of thing, usually, or unless if it gets to a bigger number, is that? So we're basically going after the kiosks, or we're not, but nationally or however that works in the state. Like, why is that not a bigger priority, and who would be the one to really aim at that?
It's really just a game of whack-a-mole, right? Like, we get a few people hit here, somebody else gets a few people hit there. But like I said, they're at the federal level, maybe they could figure out how to restrict some of these communications or track them better or things like that we don't control. But definitely it is just they're gaming on people's willingness to be helpful, willingness to want to win something, and people buy into it. But locally, all we can do is try to do prevention. So like we do probably twice a month, we do a Facebook post trying to educate people. When you get this call, don't return the call, don't believe it, don't bite onto it. But sadly, then I'll get a call from somebody who goes, hey, I just got this call, and I'm like, yeah, that was the thing we're talking about on, social media 2 days ago, and like, oh, but until you get the phone call, you just don't realize how intense the sales pitch is and the threats that people just get sucked into, and they prey on people that are good behaved folks that are like, oh my gosh, you're gonna come and arrest me? Well, no, if we're gonna come arrest you, we have already done it. We're not gonna call you and tell you we're on our way and, give us Apple gift cards, but they prey on people's willingness to not, and they go, geez, maybe I did miss a jury trial notice. Maybe, the mail, some got lost and I didn't do something. But they prey on that. But so we try to do preventions for social media. And then Kayla ran a program, you want to talk about too, with the local PDs and the Bitcoin machines, at least in Scott County. We tried to do some work. Give a little details.
I teamed up with different agencies in Scott County, and we went and posted a warning sign on all kiosks within Scott County. So that was about 6 months ago. All of them are still up. We have our patrol deputies and officers out there looking for them. If a new machine pops up, we post it right away. Along with that, we preventative materials to like the store staff and the clerks, and how do we educate them? So you have someone come in, that's on the phone and frantic and is at the kiosk, how do we alert the clerk to know this isn't real, this isn't someone that's just coming to put money into the kiosk? So we're trying to, be on the forefront and try to figure out how do we stop this before it happens. And like Sheriff Hennon said, like how do we educate these people? And it's not an age range. That was a question earlier. We are seeing victims of all ages, so young kids to older people and everything in between. So it's just, like we spoke about how real it is to people. We've had people come into the sheriff's office lobby bawling with the scammer live on the telephone. So, and they direct them to go there, and why, I don't know. But it's very, very real. So we're trying to, be ahead of the ball.
And are we seeing, because I can think of three just sitting here, people that are close or close-ish, that have gotten AI voice, not voicemails, phone calls with AI-generated voice of a relative. And wow, sounds like, are we seeing that? They weren't necessarily in Scott County, but, so you got AI voice generated that sounds exactly like, however they get it off of video or something, who knows what. So it's like, man, do we need a password? Like, so, you get a call that like, okay, password, passcode, phrase to know like, okay, this is.
And we have gotten those. And the most common one is the grandchild.
Yeah, that's in 2 cases, that's what this was.
And what we direct people to do is, it's gonna be a race, it's gonna be a rush, right? So if someone's calling you in panic, let's slow down, but get callback information for that person and then call your loved one. Let's verify that they're okay. But you're absolutely right.
Oh.
There isn't one solution to the problem.
There's a solution, but you gotta get close to the problem, but I'll leave it there. Any other questions on this particular topic? Otherwise, thank you so much. It's a lot. It's a juggling act. Thank you so much.